Hi there, this is Dr. Monica Agarwal. Welcome to another episode of Seeking Voices, exploring the science of health and healing. I have a really neat guest today. I have Dr. Michelle Cardel here to join me today. Michelle is an obesity and nutrition scientist and a registered dietitian who focuses on the development and implementation of evidence-based healthy lifestyle strategies, particularly in those that are medically underserved. She serves as a Chief Nutrition Officer of Weight Watchers and is an adjunct professor and co-director of the Center of Integrative Cardiovascular and Metabolic Diseases at the University of Florida College of Medicine. Throughout her career, Michelle has authored over 125 scientific publications. She's received many honors, including the Excellence in Emerging Outcomes Research Award from the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. She's also received the Superior Accomplishment Award for Diversity and Inclusion in the Workplace at the University of Florida, and Outstanding Woman of the Award from the University of Alabama. She's also awarded Fellow status at the Obesity Society and Practitioner of the Year in recognition of her outstanding contributions in the field of obesity. At Weight Watchers, Michelle oversees clinical research, program innovation, and the food and nutrition database teams. In collaboration with fellow scientists and teams across the organizations, she plans and executes research studies, then implements and disseminates the findings for Weight Watchers members, the scientific community, and the greater community at large. She also leads the organization's nutrition point of view using the latest in nutritional science and collaborates across the organization to translate the evidence into member content, programs, and beyond. I'm looking forward to you meeting her and listening to our conversation. So, hey, Michelle, it's so great to see you after a long time. How are things?
Things are good. I'm so happy to see you, Monica. It's been a while.
Yes, thanks so much for being on my show. I appreciate it. I wanted to get started by when telling I've already told the audience all about you and raved about you, but I wanted you to maybe give us from your perspective, instead of me telling them about who you are, where you started. So talk a little bit about the work and how we met at University of Florida and the work you were doing there, and maybe some of your evolution and where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you and I met when I was a faculty member at University of Florida in the College of Medicine. And I continue to be a faculty member there and co-director for the Center for Integrative Cardiovascular and Metabolic Disease. But about 5 years ago, I got the opportunity to move into industry and to come to Weight Watchers to lead their clinical trials. And over time, my role has expanded, and now I serve as Chief Nutrition Officer at Weight Watchers, leading the clinical trials team, our program innovation team, and food and nutrition database teams.
No, that's super awesome and so cool to think about. But how does that happen? What were you doing at UF, and do you feel like you're doing the same thing at Weight Watchers, or tell me about how that worked?
Well, it's actually kind of funny. I thought I was going to be an academic for life. I loved my faculty position. I was in an incredible department. I had a fully funded NIH lab, loved my students. And the way it came about was this was in probably around 2018, 2019.
Well, before you tell us about 2018, what were you doing in your lab at UF?
I was developing behavioral weight management interventions tailored for, at that time, looking at adolescents, but also working in studies with adults with a focus on folks who tend to be medically underserved. So folks in rural communities, those from traditionally underrepresented racial ethnic groups, folks that, spoke Spanish and didn't have the same access, for example, to a lot of the English-based resources. And we had done some studies finding that the quality of the information that was presented in Spanish was far inferior to the information for English speakers in the United States. And, living in Florida with such a high prevalence of Spanish speakers, and myself being Puerto Rican, I thought that was really informative, but also highlighted a glaring issue and one of the many components that were driving health inequities in the state of Florida, but also far beyond that.
It's so interesting because, as you know, nutrition education in general by physicians and in general in communities is super poor. And then to pour on that or add on to that, the fact that you are not even getting the same information in a different language is actually quite surprising to me. I just thought that the stuff was being like, even though it's limited, was just being translated into other languages, and it was equal. Can you speak to that a little? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah, we published a paper looking at the quality of weight management information, and we looked at the specifics of nutrition, behavior change, physical activity, and we evaluated the different sites. We essentially worked with patients living with obesity and asked them, how would you query, in Google to look for weight management information? And they told us the various prompts that they would look for, and we looked through the top 5 responses for all 30 prompts, and then we graded the information that came up on those websites. And what we saw was, when compared to the English websites, the Spanish websites were much more likely to have misinformation, were much more likely to support and promote things that we know are not evidence-based. Think about things like detoxes and teas and wraps, rather than promoting sustainable, healthy nutrition, focusing on movement that you actually enjoy and will be able to sustain over the long term, shifting to a more positive mindset, restorative sleep, all of those pillars of health and weight management that, we know so clearly. The information just wasn't there. And one of the biggest areas that we saw was that universities and hospitals were not translating a lot of their resources that were available in English to Spanish for those Spanish speakers.
Incredible. Especially in Florida, where as you pointed out, we have so many Spanish speaking people, and that we're not doing a good job in the translations. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you can think about in anything that we do. I was running a research trial recently, and it was in 4 different languages. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done to do, because you're barely getting by in English, then you're doing it in Spanish, but then to sort of try to do that same nutrition content in Chinese and in Korean, that, they're not getting, from what you're telling us from this trial and sort of what I saw firsthand, I was like, is that exactly what I said? You don't even know if they're translating exactly right. So what were some of the solutions your group came up with?
Our group talked about, from like an action item perspective, is that we wanted to see more information, not just being translated into Spanish, though that would be an amazing first step, but also translating from a cultural perspective. Culturally, people eat different foods in different countries, in different religions. And so being able to provide insight and support that actually tailors to the specific population that you're trying to reach, rather than giving this like one size fits all prescription. Because people look at this and they don't see themselves and they don't see their culture represented in it. And then they're not going to use it.
So you were working primarily at UF in weight management, but you were looking at children or adults or all comers?
I focused primarily on adolescents and adults. Throughout my career, I've worked with young kids, children, adolescents, adults. I've been in the field for 20 years, so I've been really fortunate to have the experience kind of across the life stages.
What are you thinking for people, and there are lots of moms listening to this podcast? I mean, what suggestions off the cuff? And I know that puts you on the spot a little bit, but like, what are some of your suggestions for the mom who's just trying to like get her kid to eat and often wants to just make them chicken nuggets or pick up Chick-fil-A? What are your suggestions for that mom who's just trying to make it work every day?
Which, first off, I'm just going to say, I get it. I empathize. I have an 11-year-old and 8-year-old, and I know you have kids, and we're all just doing the best that we can. And some days are, better than others. But I would say the most important thing that you can do is model the behaviors that you want to see your child engaging in. At Weight Watchers, we've done some research looking at the parental child communications around weight and health. And what we consistently heard from kids is that they do not want their parents talking to them about their weight. They want their parents to talk to them about health. And rather than talking at them of what the kids should be doing, they wanted their parents to be modeling the behaviors. If you want your kid to be more physically active, go on bike rides with them, go on walks with them, use that time as quality time for a family. If you want your kids to eat more vegetables, then you're going to need to eat more vegetables too. So rather than taking a top-down approach or singling out a single kid who may be struggling a little bit more than their siblings, really seeing this as a journey that the whole family takes together.
Yeah, no, I think that's beautiful, great advice. And, it's so true, right? Nobody wants to hear, nobody wants to hear from their parent, go do this, but I'm actually going to do this, right? And so modeling this behavior and just showing them that these are the things that you do to stay healthy and you stay strong, and not so much focusing on right weight or size as much as healthy or unhealthy. And I think that those are really key things. In fact, my kids think thin is kind of a bad word. They don't really know what it means. They're like, oh gosh, mom, they're thin. And then we're all like, oh, because the goal is healthy or unhealthy, not thin or overweight, because that's not the goal. So I like that. Michelle, tell us, I kind of interrupted you early on because you were telling us sort of how you then went over and during COVID, there was this shift in how you got involved in Weight Watchers, because that's not a normal academic path, as you point out. Like, how did that all happen?
Well, I've always been really passionate about science communication. All of our research funding, with NIH dollars comes from taxpayers. And I've always felt it's really important to disseminate the science and the information that we get from those clinical trials and those studies back to the people who are paying for them, which is the taxpayers. And so one of the ways I've engaged in science communication is through social media. And at that time, Weight Watchers was in the news for a new program that they had. And people started asking me about it. What were my thoughts on it? And so rather than answer each person individually, I just did a post on it. And the editor of a scientific journal, saw it and reached out to me and said, hey, can we turn this into a commentary? I'd love to work with you on this and publish it. Well, then the New York Times picked it up, and then that got a lot of attention. And then the Obesity Society reached out to me and said, I'd love for you to plan the opening session at this year's Obesity Week. And I went ahead and did that with Dr. Anya Jostabroff from Yale and Dr. Hiba Jabali from Australia. And it turned out the Weight Watchers team, including Dr. Gary Foster, who was the chief science officer at the time, were in the audience. And Gary approached me afterwards. And I had tried to present a very balanced perspective on the program that we were discussing. But, there were some things that I thought could be changed or modified to improve the experience for the members. And rather than being defensive or, criticizing me, he approached me and said, I thought you made some really good points. I'd love to hire you to consult with us. And so that's what started my relationship with Weight Watchers. I started off consulting with them. And a couple months later, Gary reached out and said, hey, there's going to be this new role opening up. I think you'd be a perfect fit for it. And I was like, well, I'm not sure. I'm about to go up for tenure. And he was like, Michelle, you don't need tenure in an industry position. But what really cemented the deal for me was when Gary, who was previously an academic himself, said to me, he said, Michelle, I'm offering you the chance to lead a clinical research portfolio that's going to directly inform a program for more than 5 million people across the globe at that time. Wow. And once he said that to me, I couldn't not do it. It's like that opportunity for impact, and impact is one of my values. That is ultimately what drove me to make the switch, which felt very scary. I'm not going to lie to you. It was the unknown, but I'm forever grateful that Gary took a chance on me and that I made that jump.
That's so cool. That's great. People often ask me, how I ended up where I did. And I often say I have no idea, because the path that I have laid out for myself at 20 years old or 30 years old, it's just not that path, right? And I always think of that Martin Luther King quote, that it's not about, you don't need to know what the whole staircase looks like. You just need to know what the first step does. And then the rest, each one leads to one more. And I always think about that whenever I have indecision or debate. I just need to know what it looks like right in front of me right now. I don't have to solve all the world's problems today. I just need to solve today's problems. And that definitely has helped me through. That's a great story. So what do you do at Weight Watchers then? Like, what does the chief nutrition officer do?
So, as the Chief Nutrition Officer, I oversee our clinical trials team, our program innovation team, and food and nutrition database team for clinical trials. These are, we collaborate with external academic institutions. So, for example, right now we have a large diabetes randomized control trial that we're doing in collaboration with Pennington Biomedical Research Center, Stanford, and Wake Forest. But we also run trials internally. So we have a science team of PhDs who have extensive experience running clinical trials, and so we run studies internally. And then we also have this incredible database of both clinic data, but our member data. And so we do a lot of real world evidence studies as well. And on the program innovation side and food database side, our team works to develop the programs or the interventions that roll out to our members. So I was fortunate to be a part of the teams that developed our diabetes tailored program. We developed the first GLP-1 behavioral program, so specifically for people on GLP-1 medications, which I'm happy to go into that process because it was so different than developing a standard behavioral intervention. And we just recently released a menopause program that I am so excited about because there's such a significant need for guidance during this life stage.
Yes. So actually would love to talk about that, maybe both of those. So maybe I would start with asking you a little bit about what the standard program looks like. So most of us remember the point system that Weight Watchers used to have, and our patients would always be counting their points. Like, how have you shifted that away? Because I do have now patients on Weight Watchers who are getting a much different experience. I thought maybe you could explain a little bit about what that looks like, just for the sort of maybe average person looking to lose some weight.
Yes, our trademark points program is based on kind of the latest and greatest in cutting edge nutritional science. We have a points algorithm that, yes, it incorporates calories because a calorie deficit does matter if you're looking to lose weight, but much more than that, it incorporates the holistic view of the quality of those nutritional components. So essentially, our points algorithm is it drives points up for foods that are higher in saturated fat and added sugar, and it drives the points down for foods that are higher in protein, fiber, or unsaturated fats, or those healthy fats. And so what it does is it behaviorally nudges people towards an overall healthier dietary pattern. And in addition to that, one of my favorite pieces of our program is what we call our ZeroPoint foods. And these are the foods that serve as that foundation of a healthy dietary pattern. And these foods, our members don't have to weigh, measure, or track them. So think about things like fruits and vegetables and lean sources of protein like beans, peas, lentils, eggs, seafood, etc. And so it really decreases that tracking burden that happens, on a weight management journey. And again, behaviorally nudges people towards this overall healthier dietary pattern. And we recently completed a randomized controlled trial focused on nutrition and published it in American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And we collaborated with Dr. Ana Palacios on that study. And what we saw was that in a 6-month period, not only did Weight Watchers members lose a clinically significant amount of weight, but they also improved their healthy eating index which is a measure of diet quality, by 5 points. And we consider it to be clinically significant if somebody increases their healthy eating index score by 3 points. So
And how much time was that done
in a 6-month period.
And then did you check adherence data in the long term to see after how they were at 1 year and at longer?
In that trial, we didn't, but we have data from Dr. Amy Ahern's studies at 2 years and 5 years. And in those studies, we see the focus was really more on weight retention, and about 2/3 of the weight was maintained 2 years out, and just above 40% of the weight was retained 5 years out.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Those are good, important studies, and it's nice to hear that you're publishing them in important journals.
Mhm.
So that's great to see. And I have actually liked the Weight Watchers program. I didn't like the program, I'll admit, in the past, because I do
Mhm.
think that the focus on calories was too much.
Mhm.
It was confusing, and patients were learning that it was okay to eat sugary foods as long as it was still below a caloric deficit. Whereas now I feel like that shift and focus on these 0 point things really does incentivize people to eat those foods because it's a 0 point. And so that is actually quite thrilling to me. And so I have recommended that program for people who really like to count. And I'm not a big counter, but I know that I've appreciated over time that there's some patients and some people that really need to hang on to a number. And so they've really appreciated the point system program because they're like, oh, I can't eat that because it's a point or it's whatever. And that's really helped some patients. So that's great to see. So if that's sort of what the standard program looks like, we know from the GLP-1 data. So GLP-1 are medications like you may have heard of, like Ozempic, Mounjaro, Zepbound. And these medications we know can cause you to lose weight. But we also know from the step data, all the step data, I guess, that when you stop the GLP-1s, people often will gain the weight back. So what have you and then also there's the sarcopenia data, which shows, right, that not only do you lose muscle mass, not only you lose water, you lose weight, but you also have some mild reduction, maybe not mild reduction in your muscle mass. So how have you kind of worked through this?
Yeah. So as somebody who's been in the field for a long time, I think the advancement of science and medicine with these GLP-1s has transformed, the
Incredible.
weight management industry. I mean,
100%.
these medications are life-changing for patients who medically qualify.
So
Um,
I'm glad you said that. Actually, let's just say that because that's really important for people to know that I love these medicines too.
mhm.
Like I think they are fantastic, and I recommend them to many patients. But then there's also this negative side that people are talking about. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. But of course, with any medication, there's going to have potential side effects. And some potential side effects to consider with these medications are nutritional deficiencies. So we know from research that Dr. Scott Bush has published from Cleveland Clinic that a pretty significant amount of patients on these medications do develop nutritional deficiencies like anemia or vitamin D deficiency. So it's really important to make sure that with that suppressed appetite, that they're really maximizing nutritional bang for their buck.
Yeah, so
And
I would say make sure every calorie counts. But
exactly.
when can you explain that to the audience a little bit for maybe people who don't understand that? Is it the GLP-1 itself that's causing the nutritional deficiency, or is it that maybe kind of go through the fact that it's just that they're for every calorie? Like, what do we mean by that?
Yeah, so these medications are really powerful in the sense that they suppress your appetite and they delay gastric emptying, so you feel fuller for longer. So people on average are, cutting their calories by a significant amount. So they still have to meet their nutritional needs, but with much less, you know, foods to be able to
Input,
do
yeah,
that.
less input. You get less
Exactly.
to put in, and so everything. That's what we mean when we say every calorie has to count. Every bite has to count
Yes.
because there's no room. Like your tummy's going to fill. We see the same thing with seniors too, right? Where they have
Mhm.
really small stomachs, and so you have to really make sure that every bite you take has some nutritional value.
Exactly. And then, there's the flip side of what you're saying with the sarcopenia, our concern, because the medications result in fairly rapid weight loss, there's that loss of that fat-free mass or that muscle mass. And so we want to prevent that as much as possible. And so all of this was in our head when we were thinking about developing this GLP-1 behavioral program, because we want to really focus on nutritional adequacy, making sure patients are getting enough calories, enough protein, fiber, hydration, because one thing a lot of people don't realize is the GLP-1s also suppress your thirst signaling, or those natural hungers that tell you to drink more, particularly water. And then on the flip side, we wanted to address that lean mass or that fat-free mass reduction. And so what we did in our behavioral program is we developed a program that focuses on nutritional adequacy through these various nutrition targets, and recognizes that you have to pair, the protein is important, but it's got to be paired with the physical activity, particularly that resistance training. There's a great systematic review and meta-analysis that recently came out that showed that when you're trying to build muscle, protein does play a significant role, but it's about 10% of the role in building that muscle, whereas the resistance training plays about 90% of the role. So it's that perfect marriage. You need both, and you need them to happen together.
So the people that are going out and just drinking protein drinks but not exercising, what do you think about that?
I think it's better than not drinking any protein, but you'll really optimize your health, your well-being, and your side effects if you're pairing the nutrition component with the physical activity component. And ideally, I know it's really difficult to reach those protein goals from food alone when you're on a GLP-1 medication, particularly when they're titrating the dose up. But ideally, you want to meet your nutritional goals from like a food first perspective. And on those days and in those times where that's not possible, because maybe it's the day after your injection and you just can't eat anything, then that's where those protein shakes and those protein bars can play a role. But on the days where it's possible, as a dietitian, I would love to see patients meeting their goals for fiber, for protein, for their vitamins and minerals from whole, unprocessed foods that form that, healthy foundation.
Well, I love that. I think people need to hear that. So every day, if I could, they could just say that to themselves, like the goal is whole unprocessed foods, whole unprocessed foods. And every time you pick up something in the grocery store, ask yourself, is this a whole unprocessed food? And 75% of the time, as we know, in the grocery store, it's probably not. And so remembering is this, then I need to walk away from this. How do you work with people who are struggling with food addiction, and people at Weight Watchers that come to you and they like to eat, they like the feeling of eating, and they are in that sort of over 250 pound range? I mean, do you have a separate program for people that are kind of struggling in that space?
We don't have a separate program specifically for that, but I will say that both our behavioral program and our clinic programs could be appropriate. And of course, that decision has to be made between a patient and their healthcare provider. But what we see from our data is that disordered eating pathology, including emotional eating, including binge eating, does improve with the Weight Watchers program, whether you're talking about without medications or with medications. And we just finished a clinical trial, a 6-month clinical trial for folks on GLP-1 medications who were given our GLP-1 companion program. And we saw a significant improvement in disordered eating pathology, including binge eating. And, anecdotally, one of our patients, and she has shared this publicly on social media, she's been very open, and I really applaud her vulnerability, but she used to have 2 to 3 binge eating episodes a week. And since she got on a GLP-1 medication, she has not had a single episode of binge eating. And she told me one day, she said, even if I didn't lose a single pound more, I would want to stay on these medications because of the impact it has had on my food noise and in my quality of life.
I like that word, food noise. My food noise. That's interesting word choice. So tell us about I mean, it's great. So in the GLP-1 program, how do you accommodate, or how do you emphasize, or what part of, like, is there, it's not just the nutrition piece then, because you're saying behavioral health. So tell me about the other components in the behavioral health part of it.
We have workshops through the Weight Watchers program. And what we were hearing from patients when we were developing this program is that they were really struggling. You know, we know weight bias and stigma is pervasive in this society. And patients were saying, I was shamed for living in a larger body. And then now I'm shamed for taking a medication to address my, chronic condition of obesity or diabetes or whatever it was they were taking it for. And so patients said they felt like they were stuck between a rock and a hard place. And many of them said they weren't telling anybody that they were on medications because they just didn't want to be shamed for doing something to improve their health. And so that was a big indicator to us that we needed to create non-judgmental, supportive
Yeah.
spaces for patients to share their journey and to learn from each other and to feel like they're not going through it alone. And so in our workshops, we have workshops tailored for patients on GLP-1s, and our coaches are trained in behavior change and in providing that non-judgmental, empathetic, respectful support and facilitating that peer-to-peer mentoring. And it just makes a huge difference for the patients.
Yeah. I mean, imagine just having that support system in general is so lovely. And one of the pieces I think we lack so much in medicine is that this is something I focus on a lot in my clinic, is the nutrition. And I spend a lot of time with the patients, but I feel actually, I'm developing programs where I can do shared medical visits just because I'm trying to get more, I want my patients to be able to connect, because I think they're missing that really fundamental piece of being able to work on these changes with other people. So I applaud you for the work you're doing there at Weight Watchers in this space. Tell us, Michelle, about the menopause program. So as somebody who's aging and starting to be like, things are going to be different soon. What kind of things are you focused on to help the aging woman? And I love that you're doing this in the first place, because not enough people, I mean, there's more and more discussion, which I appreciate in media now, with Oprah bringing together the menopause group. And so I love that there's at least some conversation, and, and not the stigma of going through menopause, which makes me crazy when people make fun of women who are having hot flashes and things like that. But I appreciate so much that there's more conversation about it. And how is Weight Watchers working to focus on menopause and the aging woman who's struggling with the central obesity, who's dealing with lack of interest in energy, and all those sort of things that come along with weight related to menopause. And with that, what people don't maybe realize is your cholesterol changes and often goes to the worse. Your blood pressure can go up. All these things are related and seen in the menopause state.
Well, as you well know, because you're the one treating so many of these women, this is a really challenging life stage for a variety of reasons. We have estrogen receptors in every organ in our body, and as our estrogen declines, that's why it seems like everything goes haywire in a sense. And candidly, I'm experiencing perimenopause myself, and so I was really fortunate that I got to be part of our pilot intervention group, really testing this concept of, is there a need? Is there a space, for Weight Watchers to play in menopause? And we did some pilot testing where we had like a 6-week program essentially. And I got to be one of the interventionists, and we held these weekly workshops and used the Weight Watchers program as the basis for it. And really similar to the GLP-1 experience, what we heard loud and clear is that women feel alone in this journey. They often feel isolated. Sometimes they're going through it before or after their friends. For a long time, there was a stigma around talking about menopause. And like you mentioned, thankfully that's going away. But to help women feel like they're not crazy and they're not alone in this. I can share my own experience and this is me as like a very privileged and I'm fortunate to be very educated. I went to my primary care doctor, who I have a great relationship with. And when I went to him saying, I think I'm in perimenopause, these are the symptoms. And basically his response to me was, you're not in perimenopause. You're just stressed out. You have a stressful job. And his response was, have you ever considered stopping working?
Oh, wow.
And I just
Wow.
looked at him and I was like, no, I have not considered stopping working. And he was like, well, do you want me to prescribe you an antidepressant? And I felt so dismissed and I felt so small leaving that appointment. And it was so clear to me that women, if somebody who's as fortunate as me is having that experience with their healthcare provider that they have a 10 plus year relationship with, what is the experience that so many other women are having? And we know from the data that women often have to go to 5 to 7 healthcare providers to fully address their menopause symptoms. And that shouldn't be like that. And so what we have developed is a comprehensive menopause care system, where if what you want is the behavioral weight management piece that's tailored for your nutritional needs on menopause, we have that. And if you'd like to expand that and seek, clinician care for clinicians that are trained in menopause. And if you're curious about menopause hormone therapy and you want to see if you medically qualify for that, we offer that as well. So it's really, we have registered dietitians, we have fitness specialists, insurance coordinators, care coordinators, our workshops, our menopause tailored workshops, where we have our coaches that are trained. So really creating this ecosystem where women can get that empathetic, evidence-based, respectful care that I wish I had when I sought help for my symptomology.
Thank you for sharing that piece, because I think it's so important for women to hear that, that a woman who, as you point out, who's educated, who knows when they're walking in the door, sort of what's happening, and to then be put into that bucket or whatever of like, yeah, maybe you should quit your job. I mean, it's actually mind boggling to me. And I have so many comments that are probably X-rated for this that I would want to say in this moment, but I'm not going to. But I'm blown away. And so, I have to say I'm keen on seeing more of your programming, because I too maybe haven't fully understood the depth and the breadth of areas that you're focusing on. And I really am intrigued by this program that you're doing with menopause, because I do take care of a lot of sort of the 40 to 60-year-old range women who are asking me these questions about hormone replacement and menopausal hormone therapy. And I'm a big believer and supporter of those therapies, by the way. But I do think that, again, we, as clinicians, so much of the time we're missing so many other pieces, where I want to bring women to have that social support system. I want them to be able to understand that there's actually foods that you can eat, and the impact of activity on your menopausal symptoms, which I think are forgotten and ignored, or just people are too busy. And so I really like that there's something out there that I can refer my patients to, who might be able to get some of that support that I'm unable to provide on a daily basis. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that women in this life stage, we need more protein, we need more resistance training, we need more fiber and hydration. And it's real when women tell us, I'm eating the same way and I'm moving the same way and my body is changing and I need help, I need support. That is real. Like, if you're experiencing that, you are not crazy. That is a real thing. And just knowing that there's evidence-based resources out there to support you. And that you're not alone in that journey. It's so important.
Yes, it's validating and important, and I'm really impressed. So thank you for sharing that. I have to admit, I wasn't sure what I was gonna hear about Weight Watchers and how skeptical I was gonna be when I started this call, but I'm very pleasantly surprised to hear what you're doing at Weight Watchers, the niche areas that you're focusing in on, including not only are you taking care of sort of weight loss, but you're saying and appreciating that the world is changing, that GLP-1s are important, that people have struggling with it, they have different struggles, and that you've added in, and maybe you've had and I didn't know that you had such a focus on the exercise physiology, the behavioral health piece. And those are pieces that I don't think I fully understood that you had, which I think is so important.
I agree. It's, people tend to think that the focus is about a number on the scale, but it's not. That's a data point, and that can be an informative data point, but it's really about holistic health and helping people to live their healthiest and happiest lives, whatever that looks like for them.
It's lovely, and a great place to end on. Michelle, you've been so fantastic. I appreciate the work that you're doing. And it's definitely been neat to watch your career as it's changed. And I will admit, when I first met you, I would not have expected that you would have ended up here, but I love that you have, because I think, again, everybody's on this weird life journey, and who knows how it's going to go. But I seem to remember your husband worked in the same area, right? And so is he still working at UF?
Yep, he's still a professor in the College of Medicine at UF, and he's doing incredible work in microbiome and maternal child health. And I'm amazed by all that he does. He's an exceptional scientist.
Wow, I love it. Well, this is Dr. Michelle Cardel. Really nice to spend time with you, hear about your journey, but also to hear more about Weight Watchers. And Dr. Michelle is the Chief Nutrition Officer for Weight Watchers, and really brings a very scientific approach to nutrition and wellness, and really has added in a lot of beautiful areas to the Weight Watchers program that I'm really impressed to hear about. I'm excited to look more into that menopause program and start referring my patients to it. So thank you for your time. And I will put a lot of Michelle's information in the show notes so you can kind of follow her and learn from her as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Monica.